The very first thing that I have to say in this video is Ime Udoka was an excellent hire for the Houston Rockets. This is the exact same position that I maintained the moment that they hired him all offseason long. When I made a Rockets season preview, I highlighted how good of a mind he was when it comes to coaching. In the NBA, I think he's just an excellent NBA coach. I really do. And I also do believe he's done a great job early in the season. But right now, this video is going to be maybe a little critical of him. And I want to point out, first of all, I am a big believer in what he's doing. I think he's a smart mind. I think he's leading the Houston Rockets in a positive way. But right now, there's a big question, especially going around on Twitter, about Jalen Green. And really that question is, what is going on with Jalen Green? And a lot of people are starting to say Jalen Green is flat out bad at basketball. And that's something I just do not believe. Now, listen, I was never the biggest Jalen Green believer. In his draft class, a lot of people told me, oh, he should be the first overall pick, he should be this, and I was a little bit more gun shy on him. I liked a lot of his traits. I still think there's a lot in there for being a very good NBA player. In fact, even a great NBA player if everything goes right still. And we're kind of at a breaking point where people want to see him string together multiple great performances night in, night out, and he's not doing that right now. But I think there's a reason why, and I think it falls on Ime Udoka's shoulders a little bit. So we're going to dive into the numbers in this video. Remember, this is what real critical analysis looks like. I think Udoka's great. I think he was the perfect hire in Houston, but I can still point out things that I don't think he's doing great. So keep that in mind in this video. If you do enjoy the analysis and the content, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and let's jump into it now. I don't want to waste any of your time. And really the first thing that I believed when I said that the Houston Rockets are going to be a lot better than anyone else expects is the fact that their defense was going to be much better than anyone else expects. And at the time I'm recording this, according to NBA.com statistics, the Houston Rockets actually have the second best defensive rating in the entire NBA. To me, that's no surprise. I actually have talked at length before about Ime Udoka. I think his pick and roll defensive identity and coverages are just genius. I think he is able to adapt on the fly. And I said in the offseason, I thought he was going to be the guy to make Alperen Şengün work on the defensive end. And there was a lot of questions around LP, if he was going to be a good defender, if he could ever really hold up at the center spot. And I think this year early on, we've gotten the answers to that because of Udoka. So I want to give a little context here to exactly everything I believe about Udoka. If he's a good coach, bad coach, what is he exactly? And like I said, I think he's a very good coach. And I think the defensive rating specifically is a really strong indicator as to that point, because the Rockets last couple of years under Stephen Silas couldn't guard a Park Carr, and now this team is not only guarding, they're guarding very, very well. In fact, they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. Very quickly on, I do think Jalen Green is an improved defender as well, because this video is focused on Jalen Green, and kind of, it's a little bit of a symbiotic relationship between him and Ime Udoka, and I think it's important to get into that. And when we look at the numbers for Jalen Green in his most recent games, there are quite a few stinkers in there. I will not deny that. Against the Pacers, 20 minutes, only 5 points, 2 of 7 shooting. Against the Pelicans, only playing 22 minutes, 9 points. There's a couple games there in the teens, but for the most part, these aren't great performances, and these are not the performances you're hoping to see from your former number 2 overall pick. That's just the reality. And I know the fun thing to do is going to be blame the player and say the player sucks, the player's not good, the player's bad. I think there's a lot of things going into some of his lackluster performance, and I think it's really not his fault at all, honestly, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, because when we look at the Houston Rockets, the team as a whole just doesn't really score points. They actually are still toward the bottom of the NBA in scoring, and if you look at the other teams down there, it's the Memphis Grizzlies, who have not been good this season. Of course, getting Ja Morant back has been huge for them, but then you have teams that are considered tanking teams, the Blazers, the Pistons, the Bulls, who might trade most of their starters. The Hornets are a team that has been perennially rebuilding. And then the Spurs, obviously, first year with Victor, there's been some nice flashes, but the team isn't good. And there's been a lot of problems. And then the Rockets are still right there. They just don't score the ball very well. So if there is something to be critical of Ime Udoka on, it's the offensive end of the floor. Now, again, this is good, fair criticism. The Rockets are really solid right now. They're playing good basketball. They're 15-13. They have a positive net rating. This is a good team. The Rockets are an interesting watch for me this year for a couple of reasons. And it really comes down to how their offense functions, especially by play type. And it's a really interesting amount of information you can get from NBA.com. So when we look at them for their isolation offense, in fact, they're one of the worst isolation offenses in the league. Now, again, their frequency isn't incredible. They don't do it super often, and that's kind of a mark of a solid team, is the fact that they don't go into isolation very frequently. About 5% of the time or so, the Rockets are in isolation, and they're scoring less than 0.9 points per possession. A signal of a great NBA offense is about 1.18 to 1.25 points per possession in a given type of set. Now, isolation is always typically lower, just kind of the way that it is. Isolation basketball is really hard to consistently score and find success by playing that way. And the Houston Rockets, even though they don't do it very frequently, they're in fact a really good example of a bad team in isolation. And it kind of makes sense when you think about the roster. They don't have a top 5 player in the world, a top 10 player in the world, but there's also some flaws with their spacing. And I think it's really important to note that, because when we get into their actual isolation numbers across the board for their players who qualify for enough isolations per game, you see that really they don't have a good singular isolation score. Alperen Sengun's their best example of it, but he only isolates about 1.2 possessions per game. Now, he does score over a point per possession. Alperen Sengun's been playing like a near all-star this season. He's been fantastic. I think a lot of people were hoping to see that same jump from Jalen Green. It just isn't there, but I think a lot of people have gotten to a point where they think, oh, Jalen Green's terrible. Listen, Jalen Green's their highest isolation player. He isolates more frequently on this team than anyone else by a pretty significant margin. And he's scoring decently well on it, over 0.9 points per possession. If you compare that to Fred VanVleet, he's outscoring him on a point per possession basis. He is significantly outscoring Jabari Smith Jr. One thing here is you kind of see the lack of true top end talent. I'm talking like, again, top 5, top 10 player in the world talent, because you don't have an elite isolation player. And then in addition to that, I mean, Jalen Green's just not that bad compared to Fred VanVleet, who has received a lot of love. He's been really good in Houston this season so far. But like, listen, if we're going to try and create a narrative that Jalen Green's bad at basketball, you have to dig into some of the numbers here, and the data just doesn't support that point very well. And then secondly, when we get into their pick and roll, and this is really the main theme of the video, and I think it's the most important thing to talk about when we talk about and discuss the Houston Rockets right now, they run pick and roll fairly frequently, about 18% of the time. And again, they are toward the bottom when it comes to points per possession through the pick and roll ball handlers. And again, it's not just a Jalen Green issue, and that's my entire point here. They're just scoring 0.86 points per possession, which is really, really poor. And when we actually get into the numbers here individually, looking at the players, again, minimum of 10 minutes per game and 10 possessions per play type to qualify. The stats come from NBA.com, provided by Synergy. And when you look at this team, Dillon Brooks has been surprisingly good in the pick and roll, which you love to see. That's part of why he's been playing so well, is he's been much more efficient than we're accustomed to seeing. But then when you, again, look at the difference between Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green, this is where Jalen Green does take a little bit of a step back behind VanVleet, and a lot of that comes from VanVleet's experience. He's a very crafty player, and he has found a ton of success. So I know people in the comments are going to say, when I bring up some of the issues using film, people are going to say, oh my gosh, how is Fred VanVleet finding success then and Jalen Green isn't? And to me, the real reason is Fred VanVleet's a little bit shiftier, I think a little bit more nuanced in his attack. Obviously Green a little bit more athletic, and I would say a lot more athletic, to be honest. But when it comes to VanVleet, you know, he's kind of got that little Brunsonism to him, where you can play off of your feet, you're creative, you can get up and unders and finish around the rim in kind of creative ways, and I think that elevates VanVleet. I think he's also just a little bit more comfortable with the ball in his hands as a true point guard compared to what Jalen Green is, kind of a combo guard or more of a shooting guard. I think because of that, you're just seeing the difference between a multi-year vet and Jalen Green, who's starting to just barely become a veteran in this league, right? He's still really, really young, and I think a lot of the tools are there, but he's just shooting really poorly out of the pick and roll, just 33%. There's a big reason as to why on that, and it's really the types of shots that are afforded to him through the pick and roll, and we're going to discuss that right now. But just looking at the numbers, they don't really have good pick and roll players. Dillon Brooks leading your team in points per possession out of the pick and roll is not very good. So here's our first example now with Jalen Green running the pick and roll, and there's a couple of things that I want to touch on. Part of the main flaw that I want to point out here with the Houston Rockets is the fact that they are rather stagnant off the basketball. And that can be okay, especially when the ball moves, and if you have a kind of ball movement, swing the ball offense. Player movement is way less important, but typically what creates good offense is either ball movement or player movement, or in really great examples, both. That's when I think about like the Golden State Warriors in their heyday, where you'd have Steph Curry flying around and Draymond Green kind of running the show. You have players moving and the ball moves. Because of that, you typically find the defense in weak spots. But here with the Houston Rockets, it's a little bit different, specifically in their pick and roll offense. And the reason this one is so important is because in the pick and roll, the ball doesn't really move. You have someone running the show, essentially, and it becomes kind of a two-man game, which is really good. These two-man actions are a pivotal part of basketball, of course. But typically teams mix in some things around this. Now, it is very important to provide spacing, and the Rockets are doing a good job of that. And I think part of the reason that this is in their philosophy, at least for this season, is it's really simple. And I think Ime Udoka, with the emphasis he wanted to put on the defense, the offensive side was priority number 2. And that is completely okay. So their offense is pretty basic, pretty simple. There's not a ton of movement, and that's okay for the most part. But I think if you want to dig into the numbers and say, why is this team not a good pick and roll team? Why is this team a bad isolation team? Not only do you not have the top end talent potentially, but you're also looking at a team that doesn't really maximize their talent by creating more advantages with more off-ball movement. And I think this example is really a perfect one. If we look at Dillon Brooks and we look at Fred VanVleet, their sole job here in Houston's offense is to space. We also have someone in the deep left corner. Can't see him on the screen now, but they're there, trust me. And we have Alperen Sengun setting a screen on Austin Reeves. Now, Jalen Green does a really bad job here for one reason. Jalen Green does not wait. There's really not a lot of patience from Green, which, again, if we're addressing why Jalen Green's not playing well this year, this is partially why. He needs to be patient here. He needs to allow Sengun to set up the screen. And to be honest, if I were coaching Jalen Green, I would say, look, you've got to set this up, try and attack left, act like you're going to reject the screen to come back and take the screen. And then coming off of this, look at Taurean Prince's positioning. First of all, Fred VanVleet's not really in a spot where he's spotting up right now. He's not really in a catch and shoot territory. Now, maybe VanVleet would shoot this shot because he does like some of those deep threes, but it's not a good shot for an offense, if we're being completely honest. So where does Taurean Prince to? Well, he's completely filling the gap, and that's going to be a common theme in this video. And if we look at all of the Lakers players, let's focus on all 5 of them on the floor right now. LeBron, D'Lo, Prince, Wood, and Reeves. All 5 of them are looking at Jalen Green. And this is exactly what I mean about off-ball movement. Since Brooks isn't cutting, since Jabari Smith isn't cutting, since there's no shake action on the weak side, which shake action would be essentially Brooks and VanVleet trading spots on the perimeter, just getting a little bit of kind of artificial off-ball movement to make the defenders move a little bit, maybe distract them for a second out of the two-man action. That would be beneficial for Houston. They don't really do a ton of that though. Now Jalen Green, listen, Austin Reeves goes under this screen here. If we go back, let's watch it now as it plays out. Austin Reeves goes under. Jalen Green correctly identifies that and pulls up for 3, and he gets it to go. Now, my question to you is, if he misses that shot, is that a bad possession? My answer to that is definitely not. Going into a play like this, if your sole read is, hey, my guy goes under the screen, this is a good pull. Now, I think one concern I have is the Rockets need to set better screens. They don't really have a personnel for great screen and roll bigs. Now, I think Sengun obviously is a short roller. He has a lot of talent. Sengun would be really good with the right point guard, with the right pieces around him as a roll man, but it's not the conventional like Clint Capella type for the Rockets fans out there who think about, hey, this guy's going to screen, then he's going to run downhill really fast, get really close to the rim as a lob threat, and play in that style. Sengun just doesn't give you that, which is perfectly fine. Sengun's a more talented player than Capella, but there's things that he doesn't do as well as Capella. Now, Green, though, makes a great read on this and gets it to go, but if you're going to argue, like, if this shot doesn't go in, and if you want to argue that's a bad shot, then maybe you say, okay, well, he's got to swing this ball to VanVleet, and then maybe VanVleet can attack the gap that is created by Prince filling the other gap. Perhaps that's what you want to look at. But to me, it's hard to say that this is any type of bad decision by Green, but I do think the offensive structure sets him up to basically rely on making pull-up threes. And that's my entire point here. If we go to, I think, a better example here in this play where Green is actually given some actual space to operate, and if we look at the weak side specifically, we actually get one of those shake actions that we got going on here. Jabari pins down for Brooks, and look at Halliburton and Jalen Smith. Those two guys are more focused on what their action looks like on that side of the court instead of what's going on with the actual pick and roll. Now watch it. this pick and roll again. It's a handoff into a rescreen. I like this action quite a bit, and I think this is one of the few good examples in the video where you're getting Green into, I think, what I would classify his strong spot on the floor, which they don't do very often, and that is allowing him to shoot, 12 to 16 foot jump shots in rhythm with space. And it's hard to generate those types of looks consistently, but I think the more often they're able to find that, the better. And if we go back to, again, the very beginning of this, if we count the amount of players looking at Jalen Green in this spot, it is not 5 guys like it was in that Lakers clip. It's significantly less, which is, again, the whole point of doing a shake action here is to, again, occupy the weak side defenders, and it just makes your life a little bit easier. And one thing I do want to say at this spot too, I think Şengün has to roll a little bit quicker. Now, this is actually a pretty solid screen that he sets, but this is where kind of, if Miles Turner is fully identifying that, look, Şengün's not in a spot really to catch a roll pass right now, maybe Miles Turner can play a little bit tighter to Jalen Green and limit the success that Green finds on this play, which again, I would classify as a good play for the Houston Rockets. But really, I think a lot of these, you're going to see that it comes down to Jalen Green, the lack of good screen setting, but also the lack of patience by Jalen Green in the pick and roll. Specifically, when you're watching Jalen Green here, getting guarded by Kuminga, Jeff Green's coming up to set a screen on Kuminga, but this is actually a really poor angle for Jeff Green. This is typically the type of angle you would see for someone screening for Damian Lillard around half court to free him up into a dribble pull-up at the three-point line, but with where Green's on the floor, this isn't just going to work, especially since Green isn't patient here, and now you almost have a moving screen. Green is basically walking, Kuminga's at a weird spot, and this screen doesn't generate any space laterally left or right for Jalen Green to operate, so Green tries to force the issue here, and again, this is an area where, if we go back to the very start of the play, tell me how many guys are looking at Jalen Green when we start this. Chris Paul's now looking, and look at that. All 5 guys are looking at Jalen Green. They're watching the 2-man action, and because of that, they're able to fill gaps. Moses Moody cheating in a little bit. Chris Paul cheating in. He's playing off the block. Dario Saric is in drop coverage, and Gary Payton's actually cheating up on Amen Thompson right now as well. So there's really no room for anyone to go. Jeff Green fades it, but again, Gary Payton's in a pretty good spot that if he sees Jalen Green starting to swing that basketball, he might be able to get a late closeout. And again, it's Jeff Green. That's part of the issue. What I would argue here is about at this spot of the play, as soon as Green gets inside the arc, the right play about right here is a quick kick pass over to Jabari Smith on the left wing. So this is where coaching and film study comes in for the Rockets, is they've got to coach him on this. And if the reason he's coming off the floor is things like this, they better be very transparent about the reasons why he's coming off the floor. I think one of my biggest pet peeves about coaching is sometimes there's a real lack of transparency between the head coach and the actual player, and it kind of leaves the player defeated. And I think if you're going to coach at a really high level in terms of winning games and being a championship level coach, which I do believe Udoka can be, I think maximizing a guy like Jalen Green has to be one of your top priorities, not only because he was the former 2nd overall pick, but because he has a lot of talent. He is a shot maker, and the fact that people are just flat out calling him bad right now, I just don't agree with that specifically. But I also just flat out do think that it comes down to kind of the utilization of him and the fact that they're putting him in spots where when he's running pick and rolls and in isolation, there's no off-ball movement, which doesn't really open anything up for him. Again, if you look at the paint right now, do you expect Jalen Green to be able to drive or to really effectively get off a 15-foot jump shot? And the answer to that is no. So he settles for a fadeaway, comes up short on it, and you would classify that as a bad possession because it is. Now, this is really the video that made me want to make a video on Jalen Green. This was going viral on Twitter, and these are a couple of bad misses from Green here. Now, if we analyze Jeff Green, I mean, solid screen effort, probably a moving one. Gets Trey Jones with it. And we get a rescreen here, and again, if you look at where Jalen Green's at, you might say, okay, this is kind of a forced shot, and I could completely understand the reasoning for that. But let's look at the gap here. We got the Spurs, we got drop coverage, and we've already got someone filling the gap off the elbow. And if you're wondering, like, okay, what should Green really do here? I think a pull-up 3 is probably one of the best case scenarios, especially with where the modern NBA is, with the analytics suggesting, hey, shoot 3s and not long 2s. The difference, though, for me is making a long two goes a long way in building rhythm. It also puts pressure on the defense in a different spot of the floor. And I think right now the Rockets are probably more focused on getting three-point shots up. Jalen Green is shooting with, intent to score threes. And I think this isn't a bad shot, but it's just not a good one. And I think, like, if this is what you're really going for, like, kind of like our very first play, where we saw this, where Jalen Green rises into a three-point shot here. Like, if we're going to classify this as good because he makes it, then I think my one issue is if you're going to watch this play through, you can't classify this as bad because he missed, because then it really just is a make or miss league, and your analysis is only based on result and not based off of, like, scheme or theory. Watching this one again, Şengün gets a pretty good screen off. This is the type of pull-up I would love to see for Jalen Green. I really do like this shot. I think this is a good shot. I think this punishes drop coverage. We see Victor playing low. Again, Şengün, if Green has a little bit more patience here after the pick and roll, maybe you could hit Şengün on a short roll here and get him in space one-on-one with Wemby. But that might be an advantage point. But the issue here again is with the way that the Rockets are doing this, there's no shake on the weak side. Dillon Brooks and Jabari Smith Jr. are just standing, and we get a little hedge in from the help guy, and Green's already committed to shooting. And this is, again, where you have to have transparency. You have to tell him in film, like, you have to make this pass out to the wing. And that's the whole point of running this style of offense if you're the Rockets is, hey, look, if a defender commits in like that, in drop coverage, then it should be an easy kick out to the wing. Jalen Green's just not doing that right now, and it's the coaching staff's job to get him to do that. And I think that's a really important note. This one here, side pick and roll. We need to see more of this from the Houston Rockets for Jalen Green. They run it a bit for Fred VanVleet. I would love to see Jalen Green getting more opportunities like this. And again, this is kind of a make or miss league. Creates really good separation. If he makes this shot right here, like, can you tell me this is a terrible possession? Jalen Green gets a 17, 18-foot step back jump shot. Pretty open, honestly. Like, Roddy's hand is nowhere near him, if we're being completely honest, in terms of NBA open. Now, if this is like a high school basketball game, that's not really open. But if you're looking at an NBA game, this is open. And if Green makes this shot, which he doesn't, but if he makes it, you'd say, oh, that's a really good move. That's a really good possession. He leaves it way short. So to me, like, I just think if you're going to judge everything on make or miss, then I think you have to really look deeper at some of the sets and the fact that the Rockets aren't putting him in the best situation, because for a young player, like, he's trying to make reads, and I honestly think he's doing a pretty good job of, hey, this is the type of shot I can get off here in this spot. It's relatively open. And sometimes he's just not making them. He's down to 39% from the field on the season, so he's not shooting the ball extremely well. Part of that is because of the degree of difficulty of his shots. Part of that comes to the range of his shots. He's been taking a lot of pull-up threes. Those are very tough shots to make. And I think it's the coaching staff's job to try and make life easier on him. So again, I think if we go back to that good play that we saw earlier, it's have a little bit of shake action on the weak side. Glad to see them doing that a little bit more now. And I think you have to find ways to set him up to find success. Now, this is another good example here. We get a switch on the screen, which partially the reason why Jeff Green as a screener doesn't work is because teams aren't afraid of him. You can put a small guy on him and it doesn't really hurt you. So if you're a switchable team, you're really hurting Jalen Green's efficiency here by using Jeff Green as a 5, in my opinion. I just, I don't know if it's going to work that well, because I think other teams are just as athletic as the Rockets in some cases, and I think they can match up pretty well. But Green here, toward the end of the shot clock, about 5 seconds left on the shot clock, he's looking to attack here, and Dillon Brooks is really the player I want to point out. Watch how much Dillon Brooks moves on this play. Right here, on this right-hand drive, watch Jonathan Isaac stunt in. Dillon Brooks needs to push deep corner. If he pushes deep corner, that's the pass that Jalen Green should make. Not that he would, but should make. And again, this comes down to the Rockets' offensive structure, something I think could use some improving. If he pushes there into the corner, that's an open shot for Dillon Brooks. And you might want to argue like, oh, well, Jalen Green should kick it to the weak side of the floor. Let's be honest about the personnel. I'm the biggest Ime Thompson believer. I love that kid. I think he's going to be an excellent, really, really great NBA player. But right now, a overhead kick from Jalen Green to an Ime Thompson catch and shoot 3, that's not good NBA offense. I'm going to be completely honest. And Jae'Sean Tate in the left corner, again, that's just not good offense. And if we look at this overall play, all 5 guys again are looking at Jalen Green. The whole point of running offensive sets, running offensive play designs, is to get your players open into space with as few defenders looking at them as possible when they have the basketball. And that's just not happening right now in Houston. Green over dribbles, turns it over. Of course, he's the one who looks really bad here, but there's structure going on right now in Houston that is leading to a lot of these events on a night-to-night basis. This is another example here against the Los Angeles Lakers. Jeff Green comes up to set the screen, and again, they just switch it. Now, this is again another example of, okay, it's a make or miss league, and if you think so, and if you think this is just great offense because Jalen Green makes the shot, then I'm going to say, okay, if you do this a whole bunch of times in a playoff series, do you think your team wins? And that's really the difference here. You can look at something and say, oh, he made the shot, that's really good. Or you can look at it and say, how frequently will he make the shot? Is this something that we're going to be able to win consistently by doing? And the issue here is, again, all 5 players are looking at Jalen Green, and it just really doesn't have any driving lanes. There's nowhere to go. Jeff Green, like if you're going to try and fit this pass in here, you have 2 guys literally ready to step in and maybe either steal the pass. You're really asking Jalen Green to fit the ball in a very tight window that I don't think he's capable of really doing, which again is a player flaw. He is not as good of a passer as you would like him to be. I think he's a willing passer. I don't think he's a great passer. There's a big difference obviously between those two. And he makes a nice pull-up 3, but if you're the Lakers and you're watching this and you get to this exact spot in the clip, like right here, you're happy with that defense. Rui Hachimura has a hand up. Green still has the ball in his hands, about to let it go. That's good defense. And Green makes the shot, and I think that's an example of his shot making and his talent. But Jeff Green being a screener is not advantageous for the Houston Rockets, in my opinion. And I think the fact that they're just not moving off the ball very much hurts them as well. Now we get to this example, and I think this is one of the better examples in the entire video. Jalen Green here pulls up for a deep step back 3 and doesn't get it to go. And you might say, this is a terrible possession by him. Let's get to what's really going on here. We get a screen set at the top. Again, another switch here because the Rockets don't have a true rim running big that puts pressure on teams that make you not want to switch because you have a 7-footer getting downhill that you're worried about as a lob threat. So Green now guarded by Zion out in space. And you might say, okay, former 2nd overall pick, he has to turn this into some type of basket. And I fully agree with you. That's the hope for him. But again, if we're talking about the coach's job of making his players' lives easier, this doesn't really do it. There's no cutting here. And again, people are going to say, oh, 5-out offense, this is good spacing. It really isn't, because when we look at the way that the Pelicans are aligned, we've got guys in both gaps. We've got a gap here toward the baseline. We've got a gap here filled toward the middle. There is no room for Jalen Green to drive. So what are his options? His option is to swing the ball to Tari Eason, start a swing, and you're hoping that maybe you can attack a closeout off of that, which is okay. It's not terrible. Or to kick it to the corner and really kind of kill your possession. There's not a lot of great options here when it comes to facilitating. So what does Jalen Green do? Well, he settles with a step back 3. And I think if we go back to this spot right here in the video, if you ask yourself, like, which way could he drive the ball? There's really no way. I mean, if he drives middle, Najee Marshall is going to be there. If he drives baseline, Trey Murphy's there. There's weak side help already in the paint with CJ McCollum. I mean, and the low man as well. There's just not good answers here for Jalen Green to properly execute. And again, this comes down to Ime Udoka. Like, this is a coaching thing. This isn't a Jalen Green issue. And again, like I said, yes, Van Vliet is a more adept pick and roll ball handler. Yes, he's a little bit better in some of these areas because he's smaller, quicker, works better in tight spaces. It doesn't mean that Jalen Green sucks. And when we look at this example again, we get a switch here. Teams are not worried about the roll. Jalen Green makes a fantastic move at the rim, honestly. But there's a few things that I think you really need to point out from this clip that would go a long way in kind of fixing some of the issues here for Houston and opening some things up. So first of all, they're getting nothing on their rolls. Like, I mean, absolutely nothing. Jalen Green, first of all, you can't fit this pass into the middle. There's 3 guys waiting. You basically have a diamond shape in that you're going to have to try and pinpoint a pass, and Jalen Green's not James Harden. He's not going to be able to fit that ball in that window. So Jalen Green promptly attacks D'Angelo Russell, which is a good decision. D'Lo is not a good defender. This is the type of attack you want to get. But if we're looking at about this spot in the play, when we get to just inside the arc, let's look at Taurean Prince. Taurean Prince has his eyes lasered onto Jalen Green. and he cannot see his man in the corner. And what most teams do, specifically the Miami Heat do this very well, is they corner cut out of there to put pressure on the help side defender. In this case, strong side help is Taurean Prince. So if you want to mitigate strong side help, you back cut him, and if he doesn't see you, you get probably a layup, and if he does see you, well, then you're opening up more wing space. Instead, the guy just stands still in the corner, exactly where Taurean Prince knows he is, and Jalen Green's at a spot where, okay, maybe I make a soft kick over to the strong side corner, and we get a kind of contested three-point shot, which isn't terrible, it's not the worst thing, but he chooses here to go up and make a beautiful move at the rim. Again, I wouldn't say this is great offense, it's a great individual play, and I think the Rockets are really relying on Green to make a lot of those to be successful this year because, like, they're just not setting him up for easy baskets as frequently. I think another great example here is against the San Antonio Spurs and again against Victor Wembanyama in drop coverage. And when we watch this play through again, my first point of emphasis here is the lack of true spacing around Amen Thompson. You see who's on the floor right now. We got Green, we got Boban, we got the other Green, we got Amen Thompson, and you have Jayshawn Tate. How many of these guys would you say are 40% three-point shooters? And why is the answer 0? If you're trying to win NBA games right now, you need to have some spacing, and especially around a young guard like Jalen Green. I think, again, people are going to rag on him. My question is, what is he really supposed to do here? He's facing drop coverage. Look at how far the gap is filled in here. Yes, the clear and obvious choice is to pass the ball to Amen Thompson, but if we're going to be honest here, do we want Amen Thompson taking that catch and shoot three? And my answer right now, just with where he's at in his development, is probably not. So Green steps back, and this is open. This is NBA open. He doesn't make it. Does it mean it's bad offense? And I think the issue here is, I think Jalen Green's making a lot of good reads. I think he's relatively smart in what he's trying to do. I think there's obvious answers of, hey, he needs to make this pass at this time. There's a lot of flaws still. As a decision maker, I still agree with that point as well, which is partially why I wasn't as high on him pre-draft as everybody else, is because I was worried about, hey, can he ever be a true league guard in the NBA? And I think right now that's trending toward no. But I still think he can be really darn good if you give him the right structure. And I think right now the Houston Rockets are not doing that because of the examples. And again, I just want to go back to this play. This is the play that I like the most that I've seen from the Houston Rockets this season. They've done this a bit with Fred VanVleet. It's not like it's brand new to their offense, but they just don't do it consistently enough to really say it's a staple in their offensive structure when it really needs to be. If you can open up Green to the mid-range area, that's really the best case scenario, because when you look at his shooting charts specifically, he's, I think, a good mid-range shooter. I think he has the skill set to be a very, very good mid-range shooter, and they just don't get him into that spot enough. They want him to finish at the rim, and obviously the analytics say shoot a lot of three-pointers, but sometimes the flow of the game, the open space on the floor, is a mid-range jump shot, and I think if you get him into that realm a little bit more, you're going to be more successful. I hope you guys did enjoy this breakdown on Jalen Green and the Houston Rockets. Again, I love Ime Udoka as a hire. I think he's done an excellent job. The Rockets at 15-13. It's an awesome story. Houston fans should be super stoked, super happy. You guys are playing good basketball for the first time in a very long time, so I'm very happy for you myself as well. I just think when it comes down to it, there's room for improvement, especially with the offensive structure, to maximize Jalen Green specifically. Because again, this video is focused on Jalen Green. Is he bad? Is he good? What is he? What's going on with him? And why is Ime Udoka partially responsible? And that's something that occurs with every team. People love to say, oh, this guy's washed, or this guy's not playing good, or this guy sucks. There's coaching decisions, there's X's and O's, there's schematics that go into everything. And players look good or bad, especially with how much parity there is in the league. It's not about just opportunity, it's about fit and how they not only fit next to other players, but how do they fit in their offense? Are they asked to go sit in the corner, or when they're sitting in the corner, do they cut it all? Derek White, I think, is an example of a guy who just does a lot of stuff. He's extremely active. He's a real impact player when it comes to winning, and part of that is because he does the little things that most basketball people don't notice. He cuts really well. He makes the extra pass. He's timely with his decisions. Those are things right now Jalen Green isn't, but I think with good coaching, you can get him a little bit closer in those areas, and I think if you have better offensive structure around him, you get a little bit more off-ball movement, you can really maximize what Jalen Green could be, which I still believe is a really good shot creator, space creator in the NBA off the dribble. I just don't know if it's going to be, hey, can he be number one option on a championship team? The answer is probably no, but maybe he could at some point grow into a second or third option with the right kind of fundamental pieces around him when it comes to not only the actual talent, but when it comes to the offensive scheme and structure as well. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.